Dust hung in the air like a held breath. The auction yard was packed shoulder to shoulder. Ranchers with sun-cracked faces, traders counting profit before the hammer fell, men who smelled of sweat, leather and ownership. Horses stamped and snorted inside the rail fence, their hides gleaming, muscles rolling beneath dust and oil. Every life there had a price. Every sound carried the weight of money changing hands. The auctioneer's voice cut sharp and fast, rattling numbers like gunfire. A prized bay horse was led forward, head high, eyes wild. The crowd leaned in. This was the kind of animal men fought over. Then a different sound broke through. Please don't buy the horse. It wasn't loud at first. Just cracked. Thin. Almost swallowed by the noise. Heads turned. Murmurs rippled. She stepped out from behind the rail. Her dress was plain and worn thin. Her hands shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. Dust clung to her skirts, her face flushed with fear and something worse. Shame sharpened into desperation. She stood too straight for someone who expected mercy. As if she'd learned long ago that begging only worked if you didn't crumble. Buy me, she said, voice breaking now louder. Buy me, rancher. I'll work. I'll be yours. Forever. Just don't leave me here. The yard fell silent. Not the respectful kind. The dangerous kind. A few men laughed. Others looked away. Some leaned closer, eyes calculating, seeing opportunity where humanity should have been. The auctioneer froze, hand hovering in the air, unsure whether to shout her down or sell her like the rest. It was clear then, this wasn't work she was being offered. This was ownership dressed up as employment. A contract written to cage her without chains. At the edge of the crowd stood a rancher who hadn't raised his hand once. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his coat worn smooth by miles and weather. His face gave nothing away. He'd come for a horse like the rest. Or maybe he'd come to remind himself he still belonged among people. His eyes met hers. And in that instant something passed between them. Not hope. Not yet. Recognition. He saw the truth she was standing in. The kind that stains a man whether he touches it or not. He knew what this was. And he knew that if he stepped forward, there would be no quiet ending. The hammer hovered in the air. The woman swallowed, waiting for the world to decide her worth. The rancher took one step forward. And just like that, the auction was no longer about a horse. The ranch lay miles from the auction yard, tucked into a shallow bend of land where the wind slowed and the dust settled heavy. By the time they arrived, the sky had darkened to bruised purple, and the first stars were beginning to pierce the evening. The woman said nothing on the ride. She sat stiff in the saddle, hands folded tight in her lap, every muscle braced as if the ground itself might betray her. The rancher dismounted first. He didn't offer his hand. He didn't hurry her either. He simply waited, watching her eyes trace the fence, the barn, the long stretch of emptiness beyond. Isolation had a way of feeling like freedom to some, and like a deeper kind of cage to others. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of old wood and cold iron. One room. A table worn smooth by years of solitary meals. A bed pushed against the far wall. He lit the lantern and set it down between them like a boundary neither was meant to cross. You can stay the night, he said. No more than that for now. Her jaw tightened. I ain't yours, she said quickly, the words sharp with fear. He met her gaze. Never said you were. Silence stretched. She stood near the door, boots still on, as if expecting him to change his mind. He busied himself with mundane things, hanging his coat, setting water to boil, anything to avoid the weight of what he'd done. He had bought her freedom with the same motion men used to buy horses. The thought sat wrong in his chest like a splinter he couldn't dig out. She watched him carefully. Every movement. Every pause. Kindness, she'd learned, often came with conditions. Ownership disguised as rescue. Safety that could be revoked without warning. Why'd you do it? She asked finally. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low. Didn't like the look of that place. That was all. They ate in silence, backs to opposite walls, the space between them filled with questions neither dared ask. No promises were made. No names exchanged. Just an understanding thin as a matchstick. This shelter was real but fragile. As the fire burned down and the night pressed closer, both of them knew the same truth. Whatever safety existed here was temporary. And trust, real trust, would cost more than either of them had yet paid. Days passed with the slow weight of dust and labor. The ranch woke before the sun, and so did they. Fences needed mending. Horses needed brushing. Water had to be hauled from a well that never forgave laziness. She worked without being asked, hands raw, breath steady, eyes always watching. Not trying to impress. Just trying to earn her place in a world that had taught her nothing was given freely. Evenings were quieter. Firelight instead of shouting. The smell of coffee instead of sweat and fear. It was in those hours when the land finally loosened its grip, that pieces of her story slipped out, not all at once, never cleanly. Men who spoke softly until papers were signed. Smiles that turned sharp when she stopped agreeing. Being traded between hands like a debt no one wanted to claim. They said it was work, she said once, staring into the flames. But work don't leave marks like that. She didn't speak like someone seeking pity. She spoke like someone stating whether. Facts learned the hard way. When kindness came too fast, she flinched. When voices rose, her shoulders squared, ready. But when trust was earned, slow, careful, she held it like something sacred. Fierce when cornered. Watchful when offered help. Loyal once she decided you were safe. Survival had shaped her sharper than cruelty ever could. The rancher listened more than he spoke. He always did. But some nights the fire pulled things out of him too. Not full confessions. Just fragments. Town deal gone wrong. A man with papers and friends in high places. Land stolen through ink instead of gunfire. He'd learned early that towns had rules that bent for certain men, and broke everyone else. That was why he lived out here. Why he paid in cash. Why he never signed anything he didn't write himself. She noticed the way his jaw tightened when auctions were mentioned. The way he spat when certain names came up. Once she asked him why he'd stepped in that day. Why he'd chosen trouble instead of another horse. He didn't answer right away. Just stared out at the dark. Because I've seen what happens when no one does, he finally said. Little things began to line up. The auctioneer's confidence. The men who came sniffing around too fast. Contracts that didn't name her. Only labeled her as collateral. It wasn't just desperation that put her on that block. It was a system. One that dressed ownership up as legality and called it order. Powerful men making profits where the law looked the other way. That ranch was no bargain. It was a refuge, but it was also a challenge. And both of them knew now. What she'd escaped wasn't finished with her yet. The riders arrived just after noon, when the sun sat high and the land offered nowhere to hide. 3 men, clean coats dusted just enough to look honest, reined in at the edge of the ranch like they already owned it. Their horses were strong, fed well, the kind of animals that told stories before their riders ever spoke. The rancher stepped out onto the porch, slow and deliberate. He didn't reach for his rifle. Not yet. You made a purchase in town, the lead man said, smiling without warmth. And you took something that wasn't yours to keep. The woman watched from the doorway, her breath caught tight in her chest. She'd heard that tone before. Polite. Certain. The sound of men who knew the law bent in their direction. There were papers, another added. Debts settled. Agreements made. Frontier law don't care much for feelings. The rancher's eyes stayed steady. She ain't livestock. That earned a chuckle. Out here, rancher, the lead man said, leaning forward in his saddle. Everything's worth what someone's willing to pay. And someone already did. The woman stepped back inside, hands shaking. She gathered her few things, fast, quiet. She'd run before. She knew the pattern. Stay too long and blood followed. She moved toward the back door, tears burning but unshed. I'll go, she said softly when the rancher turned. I won't be the reason they come back shooting. He didn't answer her right away. He walked down the steps instead, boots hitting dirt with finality. You tell your bosses this, he said to the men. No contract I didn't sign binds me. No debt I don't know gets paid on my land. The smile vanished. You're making this difficult. He nodded once. That's the idea. The men lingered a moment longer, eyes cold, memorizing the place. Then they turned their horses away. This ain't over, the lead man called back. The dust settled slow after they left. The rancher stood there a long moment before going back inside. He looked at the woman, really looked this time. "You ain't running," he said. "Not today." It was the first line he crossed. And the frontier took note. The ranch changed its posture the moment the sun dipped low. What had been a refuge, quiet, half forgotten by the world, began to harden into something else. Something ready. The rancher moved without ceremony, tightening wire along the fence, replacing rotted posts with fresh-cut timber. Each strike of the hammer echoed across the plain, steady and deliberate. This wasn't panic. This was experience. He had seen how retaliation came riding, slow at first, then all at once. Inside the cabin, he laid his rifles out on the table. One by one he cleaned them, checked the actions, counted the rounds. He didn't rush. Rushing got men killed. Outside, the wind dragged dust across the yard in thin sheets, whispering of eyes beyond the hills. The rancher marked sightlines from the windows, memorized the distances to the fence, the corral, the low rise to the east. He knew where the first shot would come from. He always did. She watched him at first in silence. Then she spoke. "I won't hide." The words were calm, final. When he handed her a task, simple at first, carrying boards, stacking firewood, she took it without hesitation. She learned quickly where to move, when to keep her head down. She asked the right questions, not fearful ones, practical ones. He showed her how to load a rifle, how to listen for horses before you heard them. Her hands shook once, then steadied. "I won't be owned again," she said quietly as she worked. He nodded. That was all. They ate together that night, a plain meal shared without ceremony. Bread torn in half. Coffee poured strong. No talk of tomorrow, but both of them thinking of it all the same. Later, they took turns watching the dark, the fire burning low between them. At one point, a sound in the distance made her stiffen. He raised a hand. "Listen." Then shook his head. "Wind. Just wind." She laughed then. Soft. Surprised. Like she'd forgotten the sound. That was when the shift truly happened. When fear loosened its grip, just enough to make room for something else. Trust earned the hard way. Respect, forged by standing shoulder to shoulder. This wasn't a bargain anymore. It wasn't charity. It was a choice. The ranch wasn't just shelter now. It was a line in the dirt. And both of them were ready to defend it. They came at first light. Dust rose on the far ridge, slow and deliberate, the kind that meant riders who weren't lost and weren't in a hurry. The rancher saw them from the porch, rifle resting against the post, jaw set. 6 men. Then 8. Horses spread wide, practiced, confident. This wasn't a visit. It was a collection. The woman stood just inside the doorway. She didn't ask what he saw. She already knew. A voice carried across the yard, smooth and certain. "You know why we're here." The rancher stepped forward, boots grinding into the dirt. "Turn around." Laughter followed. Cold. Amused. "She was bought fair," the voice said. "Same as that horse you were eyeing. Papers clean. Money changed hands." The word hit her like a slap. Bought. She felt the old panic rise, the one that said run, submit, disappear. For a heartbeat, she almost stepped forward. Almost gave herself back to keep blood off his land. The rancher didn't move. "She stays." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Then the first shot cracked the morning open. Wood splintered near the window. The woman dropped, crawling to the far wall as bullets thudded into the cabin. The rancher fired back, precise, controlled. One horse screamed. A man fell hard. They spread out then, circling, using the land. Shouts echoed, orders, curses, promises of what they'd do when this was over. Smoke hung low, mixing with dust and fear. Between volleys, there were long stretches of stillness so loud it made her ears ring. She loaded rifles with shaking hands that steadied as the minutes stretched on. Fear burned off, replaced by something harder. Resolve. "They'll keep coming," she said between shots. "I know," he answered. Another lull. Then a shout from behind the barn. A rush. The rancher barely got the door barred before bodies slammed against it. Wood creaked. Hinges screamed. She grabbed the shotgun he'd shown her how to use and took position at the window. This wasn't an auction anymore. This was a reckoning. Through the smoke she saw the leader step forward, hands raised. "This doesn't have to end ugly," he called. "You can hand her over. Walk away breathing." She stood up then. Fully. Stepped into view. I'm not your property, she said. Her voice carried. Clear. Unbroken. I never was. The men laughed again, but it sounded thinner now. She reached into her dress and pulled free the folded paper she'd hidden since the auction. Crumpled, sweat-stained, but legible. You want contracts? She went on. Let's talk about forged signatures. About men paid to keep mouths shut. About women sold under false names so they couldn't be traced. The leader's smile faltered. The rancher looked at her surprised. You never said. Didn't think I'd live long enough to need it, she said. She read aloud. Names. Dates. Amounts. Each word landed like a hammer. The men shifted. Some looked at each other. One lowered his rifle. You're lying, the leader snapped, but it lacked conviction. Then come get me, she said. And explain it in daylight. For a long moment no one moved. Wind rattled the grass. Smoke drifted. Somewhere, a wounded horse stamped and snorted. The rancher broke the silence. You heard her. This ends now. A shot rang out from the far side, panicked, wild. It missed. And that was enough. The fight flared again, short and vicious. But the tide had turned. Two men ran. One dropped his gun and followed. The leader backed away slowly. Eyes locked on the paper in her hands like it was poison. This isn't over, he said. She met his gaze. It is for me. When the dust finally settled, the ranch stood scarred but standing. Smoke curled from the eaves. Shell casings glinted in the dirt like spent promises. The rancher lowered his rifle. His hands were shaking now. She exhaled long and slow. She was still standing. Still free. And for the first time since that auction yard, the word property had no hold on her at all. The fight ended the way all lies do, loud at first, then hollow. When the smoke thinned and the echoes died against the hills, the men who had come claiming ownership had nothing left to stand on. Their threats scattered with the dust. Their authority collapsed under daylight. What they called law could not survive the truth spoken aloud and defended with blood. The ranch bore the marks of it. Splintered rails. Bullet scars chewed into the cabin walls. One window blown clean through. But it still stood. Upright. Unbowed. And for the first time since that auction yard, the air around it felt free of hands reaching to take. The woman stepped out into the open as dawn crept over the land. She wasn't hiding now. No chains. No bargains whispered through clenched teeth. Just her boots in the dirt and the wide stretch of sky above her. Rain began to fall then, slow, steady, washing the blood from the ground, turning dust into something living again. The rancher watched from the porch, rifle lowered, shoulders finally easing. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The choice had already been made, not with words, but with where he stood when it mattered. She turned to him once, searching his face for expectation. There was none. Only respect. Only space. I'm not owned, she said quietly. No, he answered. You're not. Repairs would come. Fences rebuilt. Holes patched. But something more important had already been restored. A line had been drawn that could not be erased. She was no longer something bought to survive. She was someone who chose where to stand. And on that ranch under a breaking sky, freedom wasn't given. It was claimed. Out on the frontier, power was loud. It jingled in pockets, cracked in gunfire, stamped itself onto papers and